Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy Veterans Day to all veterans out there watching today and that you know of. And please accept my congratulations for coming home. Excuse me. All right, World War II, the beginning of the Jeep. Yeah, that's right. It's Veterans Day, so let's talk about some of the things the veterans did. And one of the things they did was drive a cool little vehicle called the Jeep. Now, Jeep is what we call it. Its actual name was something else. The original Jeep was developed by a company called Bantam. Now, for those of you American automotive engineers and aficionados, you remember the Bantam as a little two-seat sports roadster and a little small sedan, again, two-seat. Bantam, American Bantam, designed the first, what was to become the Jeep, but the design wasn't fully accepted. Now, it became clear in late 1940 that the Americans were going to become part of World War II. American Bantam Company and Willys Overland were tasked with coming up with a vehicle the military could use. Now, the American military wanted a little four-wheel drive reconnaissance vehicle. Little is the prime word there. Now, they gave them 49 days to design a vehicle. 49 days. And to build the prototype. I mean, we're talking about reality TV shows now, building a hot rod. But they did it. Well, Bantam did it. Willys couldn't do it. They missed the mark. So the Bantam design was pretty much accepted, but it failed in that it didn't have enough torque from the motor. They wanted more power. More power. Yeah, hot rodders. Yeah, we want more power. And the original Bantam engine, though stout, wasn't stout enough. But there were other changes too. And Bantam was deemed too small a company to keep up with or produce the required number of vehicles that were going to be needed. So the contract to put a revised version of the original Bantam on the road, or on the ground, were Ford and Willys. Now, Willys initially got the contract, but they weren't big enough either to meet demand. They allowed the government to then open it up to another manufacturer. The other manufacturer was Ford. Now, the original Jeeps, excuse me, were called something else. Ford called theirs the Pygmy. 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 Willys called theirs the Quad. Now, both vehicles looked pretty similar to the Bantam BRC prototype, and that worked okay, but the government said, no, refine it. So Willys refined it. Their basic design was the one that was accepted, but Ford's grille with the slots was the one that was accepted. So the rounded nose from the Bantam went away. A flat nose that Ford designed was the new front of the Jeep. But at this point, Ford still didn't have the contract. They weren't building them. Now, Willys had the Go Devil four-cylinder, a flathead four that stayed in production through the 50s into the 60s in Jeep products. It was more powerful. It was more reliable. It had what they wanted. So that's the engine that went with it. I had one of those engines at a little Henry J. Good little motor. So first Jeep production started in Toledo, Ohio at the Jeep plant, and the model was called the MB, not the Jeep. It was called an MB. The name Jeep didn't come up yet. Now, full production went to Willys and Ford. Now, Ford called theirs the GPW. GPW being government vehicle, and P, for some reason, stood for an 80-inch wheelbase. The W was Willys engine design. So Ford was using a Willys engine design. The plans were given to Ford with all the specifications, and they had to build an identical vehicle. Initial production, Ford, in their arrogance, decided they had to have something on those vehicles that indicated it was a Ford. So they stamped a little Ford logo in the rear panel and on all the bolts. Every bolt. Cylinder head bolts, body bolts, wheel, it didn't matter. If there was a bolt on the car and Ford produced that Jeep, it had an F on it. Simple as that. Government said, yeah, no, guys, stop this crap. Because Willys started getting into that too and started doing the same thing on their versions with the Willys logo in the back. So if you happen to get one of the first, couple hundred of Jeeps that were built for World War II, and these were military only. You got to remember, there was no civilian Jeeps. You'll have either a Willys or a Ford logo someplace. Now, the Ford vehicles will have the bolts and that little panel in the back if you can find one of those. I'll tell you what, there weren't that many of those produced. Don't worry about it. If you can find one, you're very, very, very lucky. All right, the cost per vehicle, this was a disparity that I don't understand. The government allowed it, though. Willys was charging the government $648 per vehicle. Interesting. Good morning, Joe Walla. How you doing this morning? Ford was charging the government $782 per vehicle. I get the guys at Willys must have been upset, losing $140 a vehicle. That's a lot of money back in the 1940s. But regardless, that's the way it was. During the war, 640,000 Jeeps were produced. Wow, that is a bunch. Jeeps were used in every service of the military, whether it was Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines. They all got the same vehicle. And the reason they got the same vehicle was you had to be able to service them. You had to be able to get parts. All the parts had to be interchangeable. All the vehicles had to be the same. And that's why Ford and Willys decided to tweak them just a little bit, not mechanically, but just a little bit. Ford put the F on the bolts. Willys put their name on the back, so did Ford, just to make the ID available. It didn't last. It didn't work. It didn't matter. It wasn't an issue. It was ego. All right, so the Jeep was very fond, or the military guys were very fond of the Jeeps. Basically, it was kind of a military sports car at the time. Now, it sat four. It had bucket seats, 3-speed on the floor, 4-wheel drive. All-wheel drive. Gosh, this thing could really go. It really couldn't go. It wasn't a very fast vehicle. It also wasn't a very stable vehicle. And it was very narrow. It met the needs of the military. And you got to remember, they weren't supposed to be driven fast. They were just supposed to be driven off-road and on questionable surfaces. And the questionable surfaces part, it did fine. The speed part, too narrow, too tall, too top-heavy, and they had a propensity to tip over. And that was an issue, but hey, you dealt with it. It was the vehicle of choice for the military, and they really didn't have much choice because that's what the government gave them, and that's what Willys and Ford were producing. So that's what happened with the Jeep. Now, coming back from the war, Jeep was something sought after. A lot of military surplus Jeeps went into the hands of consumers, and they started using them on the roads. I remember just about every gas station where I lived in New Jersey had one, and they had a plow on the front of them, and they had a metal roof that they made for them because they didn't have roofs. They had a convertible canvas top, I guess, in military form on some of them. But, to drive them on the street in cold weather, now that they're civilians, guys were very crafty and made aluminum and steel side panels and roofs and doors. Remember, the first Jeep didn't have a door. It had openings, cutouts to get in and out. And again, simplicity was the theme. Get in, get out. So American hot rod ingenuity again comes to play. And guys built bodies on these things to make them watertight and somewhat and weather-tight. Now, they did not have a heater. No heaters. So that had to be added when they became a civilianized vehicle. Now, the first civilian Jeeps, they didn't come out till 1945. And in 1945, Willys was now the manufacturer of choice. They had the contract. Ford didn't want anything to do with them. They didn't understand that there'd be a market for them. Yet Willys built on that, and that became their mainstay. Willys cars went away, but the Jeep stayed, and the Jeep lives on today under the auspices of Fiat. Now, Chrysler bought the AMC company, which had bought Willys, and kept the vehicles alive. Jeep is a major player in the off-road and four-wheel drive vehicle and SUV vehicles. Now, one of the things about the Jeep that I also didn't mention was Ford tried to produce a water and land vehicle. One that would be in the water and one that would be great on the land. It was a compromise in both cases, and in either case, it didn't work. So they only produced about 145 of those, and that didn't work out so well, so they didn't do it. Now, the first that we talked about, the first commercial Jeeps that were available to consumers, well, they were the first ones branded as a Jeep, and that was they took the letters GP, and just called it Jeep, because that was the slang the military guys gave it to it. The servicemen gave the vehicle. So they actually created a word, Jeep, J-E-E-P. Does J-E-E-P mean anything? Not according to what I'm reading, because originally it was GP, not J-E-E-P. So Jeep, it's a Jeep. We all know what that means. It's the only thing we associate it to. So the first civilian Jeep, which is a CJ, came out in 1945, and it was branded Jeep. And that name stuck. And we've seen a whole lot of vehicles since then. The CJ, probably the most popular of the military style or off-road vehicles to hit the water and the land and the mud and the sludge and everything in between. They've come a long way from the four-cylinder flathead open-doored style, V8s, V6s, four cylinders, inline six cylinders, you name it, they've got it. Now, Jeeps were used for just about everything imaginable, including tractors with the right wheels. The Jeep, a four-wheel drive vehicle, and what they call the 1/2 to 1.5 ton capacity for reconnaissance and other military duties. The term was applied to the original Bantam, as we talked about, but like I said, they couldn't meet up with the demands. Now, Bantam did stay in business during World War II, building the trailers you see towed behind some of those military Jeeps. So I'm Hot Rod Bob. This is Veterans Day. Hats off to all veterans, regardless of the military service you were in, the branch, or when you served. Thank you for your service. Thank you for making America free. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got gas, the morning edition. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.